Dovain's cool, damp air awakened Rachel from a hazy sleep. Her pale green eyes blinked away her grogginess as she found herself staring up at a smooth, lofty ceiling. She bolted upright atop the silky crimson-red covered bed she had been draped across and gazed about her wildly in confusion. And there, at the end of the bed, she noticed a figure. A young girl, a Favian, with streaming blonde hair, dressed in a draping gown of a glorious shade of blue. The girl, in noticing as Rachel sat upright, turned her head to meet her gaze. But Rachel gasped as she saw the girl's face. There, on her right cheek in a hideous black burn, was the seal of exiles, which marked the faces of the Dark Lord's servants. As Rachel gasped, the girl raised a hand to her face and covered the seal with her fingers. They stared at one another for a few moments before the girl whispered, "Don't be afraid." She went on to explain that she was a captive and had been ordered to take the seal, but deep in her heart, she was still a loyal follower of the goddess. And then it struck Rachel. This must be the Favian girl they were searching for. "Justine?" Rachel asked, studying the girl closely. With a spark of confusion in her eyes, the girl slowly nodded. Rachel explained what was happening, who she was, and that Prince Atticus and King Marcus were searching for her, knowing that she had been taken by Salvador during the overthrow of Kennedac. At this, Justine almost wept for joy, believing that no one had been searching for her. Justine was suddenly filled with hope, but Rachel's was slowly draining. Even from the bedchamber, which she had not yet left, she could feel the cool, damp air and the looming sensation of dread all around them. She knew where she was. She had been taken down into the depths of the Caverns of Rekos, and she shivered violently to think that the Dark Lord could be in the very next room. And with that thought haunting her, Rachel asked aloud, "Tell me, Justine, where is Dovain?" But so simple and innocent a question was met with an expression of the utmost horror. Justine's face drained of color, and her eyes darted from side to side, her hands raising up to cover her face as she whispered, "Do not speak his name here. His hearing is as sharp as his wolves, and the master would be furious to hear his name spoken in such a way," she whimpered. "Master?" Rachel echoed, the word sounding sour and putrid as it fell from her lips, and Justine lowered her eyes. "Here, Dovain is master of all, and to defy him would spell certain death." Rachel wrinkled her nose and shook her head. "I would never call him my master. I would rather die." Hearing enough, Justine tossed a pile of clothing onto the bed at Rachel's feet, stating, "You are to change into these and wait for Lord Salvador to call for you." "What does he want from me? Why must I change?" Rachel asked, indicating down at the perfectly good gown and cloak she was wearing. Justine directed her eyes away and answered, "Salvador took you as a gift for our master. The master does not yet know of your presence in Rekos. These," she pointed at the clothes at Rachel's feet, "are for you to wear when you are presented to him." "A gift?" Rachel spit the words back at her, but Justine did not answer, and instead silently excused herself from the chamber, leaving Rachel alone with her thoughts. Shaking her head, Rachel lifted to examine the dress she had left behind. A bracelet with jingling beads and a handful of golden rings and other jewelry clattered to the ground from out of the fold of the dress. But Rachel was too distracted to care. The dress in her hand was a dark crimson, and the deep cut of the neckline, the sheer fabric, and the high split along the side made her sick as she examined them. This was not a dress, she decided, shaking her head at the piece of clothing. This was unfit for any dignified woman of the goddess. Picturing, with no small amount of smugness, how disappointed Salvador was going to be when he came to meet her, Rachel bundled the crimson fabric between her hands, rolling it into a ball and hurling it across the room, where it landed crumpled into the corner. Rachel stood up from the bed, a few more of the golden trinkets tumbling to the ground at her feet. Rachel brushed the wrinkles out of her traveling gown and took a deep breath. But a knock at the heavy wooden door before her caught the breath in her lungs, and she held her gaze on the door as it began to slowly open. And before her was the specter from her memories of her life, her home, and her kingdom before the overthrow, the fiend responsible for that destruction, who had once called himself her friend. His tall, sturdy build, his gleaming blue eyes, and a mysterious blend of black and silver hair conjured memories through her mind like a swirling whirlpool of sadness and chaos. "You," Rachel said in a tone barely above a whisper, clenching her jaw as she tried to scorch him with the blaze in her eyes. Salvador bowed deeply before her, gazing up from his bow with a smile as he replied, "Hello, Rachel." Upright again, he crossed his arms before the breastplate of his gleaming black armor. The burn on his cheek was barely visible from behind the strand of hair which streamed across the right side of his face, but his smile was all too mockingly obvious, though it faded as his eyes drifted down to her clothing, then across the room to the bundled fabric that was the dress he had left for her, and he snarled as he muttered, "I see you have rejected my present." "Present?" Rachel questioned, following his eyes to the crumpled dress on the floor. He shook his head. "I only wanted you to look nice when I present you to my master. But have it your way. Though I must warn you, you'll be much better off if you please him. Those who do not usually end up dead," he said with an animated flick of his fingers. "Why did you do it?" Rachel asked suddenly, and he seemed to be a bit taken aback by this, confusion crossing his face as he sharply asked, "Do what?" "Swear allegiance to him. You know better. The scribes have told you of him, and you know what horrible things he has done to our people. So why did you betray the goddess?" Salvador's eyes darkened with a deep pain, and he darted forward, standing over her and gazing down into her eyes threateningly as he dangerously growled back, "I did not betray her. She betrayed me." "How?" Rachel was quick to hiss back at him, hiding her terror as he loomed over her, raging like an animal. "She took everything from me, and then she turned my own brother against me. I had nothing and no one. But then," he said, his gaze softening as he turned his head away, "the Dark Lord, whom I had feared with all of my heart, saved me, he repeated, his eyes turning to meet hers. "I would have died in the bitter cold, alone in the forest, but he found me. He brought me here, and he became more of a brother to me than Atticus ever was. I owe him my life, and I will serve him for all of eternity." Rachel was silent and pondered these things he had told her. Dovain had protected Salvador? Saved him? But why? She thought back to all of the things she had been taught about Dovain, and could think of no reason why he would perform such a selfless act of compassion, unless he had another motive for winning over Salvador. And Rachel determined that this must be the reason, or else she might begin to doubt all she had been told about Dovain. Her thoughts, though, were interrupted by Salvador's soft gaze meeting hers as he said, "Serve him loyally, and he is a kind and generous master." But his words were lost with his utterance of the word master, and Rachel boldly shook her head and stated, "No man is my master." "Then I expect," Salvador said, his tongue clicking on the deliberate pronunciation of the word, "your time here in Rekos shall be very brief," he threatened, and with that, he spun about on his heels, gripping the door handle and stating, "The master will be returning to Rekos sometime this evening. I expect you to be more presentable when I return for you. But until then, explore the caverns to your heart's content. I will be back for you later," he said in an icy tone before disappearing through the doorway, and Rachel again found herself alone in the chamber. Putting aside her thoughts for later, Rachel made her way through the doorway, and pulling her cloak tighter around her shoulders, wandered curiously out into a much larger room. Doorways surrounded in all directions, but a massive set of double doors caught her attention. Perhaps this one led out into the caverns? With this thought in mind, she tugged roughly on the handles, but the doors did not budge. Locked. With a disappointed smirk, she turned her attention to another, equally grand set of doors, and these, she found with hesitant curiosity, were the doors that led into the vast and shadowy inner sanctum of Rekos. A dull glow seemed to radiate from some unseen place, casting a faint light across the caverns, and not far from the steps of the stone fortress where she stood was a wide and ongoing deep blue lake. In the distance, the sound of rushing water met her ears like a hush, but the water at the shores was smooth as glass, and a narrow wooden pier stretched out above the water, opening a walkway into the distant blackness. To the side of the dark castle, 3 blossoming trees with rich blooming branches stood together, bearing the most luscious and beautiful-looking deep red fruits. But despite leaping and climbing and standing on her toes, Rachel could not reach any of the fruits from the tree. So, defeated, she sat herself down at the foot of one of the trees and leaned back against it. And in the dim light, with the steady hush of water rushing in the distance, Rachel drifted off into a peaceful sleep, and all around her, the prowling darkness drew just a bit nearer to its prey.